Rise of Hawk, Part 1, Scene 9. The day was sunny and warm. Had Hilla not been so nervous, she would have enjoyed the 3-block walk with Usher through the mostly abandoned industrial area of South Docks. They turned off the street and down the driveway, entering the side door of a small wooden warehouse. Inside, jagged, dusty rays of sunlight reached through the shattered panes of glass above them, illuminating rubble on the concrete floor and odd flickering lines. Immediately above her head and running along the wall opposite the windows was a dusty metal gangway. With no obvious access ladder, the useless gangway connected a series of small rooms above them, their doors open, some half off their hinges, revealing empty, broken spaces that may have once been offices. In the middle of the downstairs area, on the bare concrete, sat a fairly modern-looking office chair. Asha led her to it, indicated that she was to sit down, and once Hilla was seated, she crouched in front of her in the dust. The younger woman gave her a gentle smile. "You can't look at him, Hilla. You have to look at me. It's dangerous for you to see Hawk's face. Do you understand?" She sensed that Asha meant that she could be killed if she knew who he was, and her heart skipped a beat. She nodded slowly. It was too late to back out now. Behind her she felt a presence and obediently kept her eyes to the front. Feet brushed on the dusty floor, and Asha looked over Hilla's shoulder at someone as they approached. The man had a distinctly blue, empathic signature. His energy pulsed and burrowed in a strange, excitable way, even though she felt that he was also very calm. A warm hand settled on her shoulder, and she fought her body's instinct to flinch. "Thank you for coming, Hilla." His voice was deep and calm, almost gentle. "I have invited you here because I have a proposition to make, and I'd like you to hear me out before you make your decision. Do you think that's fair?" Hilla found it difficult to keep her eyes on Asha, but she nodded. "Yes. From this day on, there will be a sequence of events that will end with the total annihilation of the rebels by the agency. To survive what is to come, the rebels need greater numbers and a different strategy. They also need a timeside leader who can see what will happen so that the rebels can avoid as much of this damage as possible. I offer myself as that leader." She made a noise of surprise and opened her mouth to speak, but he interrupted her. "I need you to hear me to the end, Hilla. I think once you see what I'm going to show you, you'll change your mind. But I do promise that as the new leader, I will do everything in my power to protect the rebels, however large their numbers get." The man shuffled his feet and put his other hand on her shoulder. "Asha?" His voice was barely a whisper. Asha leaned forward on the ground and took Hilla's hands as if in comfort. Her dark blue eyes were firm, but not at all afraid. "He's going to show you a vision telepathically. So you're going to feel nauseous and probably as if your skin is itchy or cold. But don't panic and don't fight it because he might accidentally hurt you. So, Hilla, please relax, okay?" Nodding, Hilla closed her eyes in an effort to calm her quick, panicked breathing. She knew what kind of damage a telepath could do to a non-telepathic mind if they fought against the intrusion. She felt at the moment he dug into her mind. It was like a pressure in the back of her head and in her temples, a pressure that kept getting heavier. Something clicked and an icy wind flowed over her body through her clothing. It felt very much like the sensation from earlier. She realized it meant that whatever this was bigger than just her and her family. Another click sounded in her mind and images flashed past her eyes. Somehow she knew that these were future events. They came quickly, flicking across her vision, and as one sequence ended, another started. Those she loved were one by one hunted down, tortured, and then killed by the agency. Tears started to run down her face. She whimpered in distress. The final image was of Nama, cornered and shooting madly at those who had trapped him, and he was gunned down. The images stopped abruptly, and she was back in the warehouse. It felt like her ears were ringing for a moment, but from the inside of her skull. Behind her, his voice was very gentle and sad. "That is what will happen if you say no. Let me show you what we can do together." The icy wind hit her skin again and she shivered. The second set of images was powerfully vivid, and she sensed the man's deep hope that this was the future that would come into being and not the first. What she saw was amazing. Over a sequence of many years, the rebel numbers expanded exponentially into hundreds, possibly even thousands across all of Irana. Images flashed of people escaping from various agency buildings, and then later, together, as a unified army fighting back against the agency. All of the images culminated at a massive explosion that ripped out of the out-armed agency tower building several stories above the road. She heard the thundering boom above her of the explosion, and then falling glass hitting concrete like little bells. It was a mental pulse, and she found herself back in the dusty warehouse, free of his mental pressure. She laughed. You can actually win against the agency? Together we have a better chance at it. I cannot guarantee a total victory, because the future is not set. But yes, I will do my best to help the rebels defend themselves and free others. She sensed under the genuine intention of his promise there was more to it than just helping the rebels. What is it you want in return? You're a quick one, Helen Norman. There was a smile in his face, his voice. Sometime in the future, I will call upon the rebels to help me with something much bigger. Until then, all I ask is that the rebels trust me and follow my orders. I will do everything in my power to keep as many of you alive as possible. Looking down at Asha, Hilla squeezed the younger woman's hand. Do you trust him, Asha? The woman nodded. Hilla sensed fear and worry from her, but underneath that she did indeed seem to trust this man, whoever he was. The hands on his shoulders pulsed with that icy energy again, and he sighed. I'm sorry, we've run out of time here. Nama's searching for you, and it isn't safe for him to meet me yet. He lifted his hands from his shoulders. I'll give you until midnight to think about it. Asha, let me know when the decision is made. Of course. Scene 10. Asha stood at a distance, watching her brother's sleeping face. Talon looked a lot like Asha remembered. Even at 16 he'd been strong and mature, so much like their father. But now he looked old and world-weary. She wondered what his life had been like while she was in the agency. His messy black hair was peppered with grey, and there was an unusual crease in his forehead just above his eyebrows, as if he concentrated too much all the time. At 27, surely, he wasn't old enough to start getting wrinkles. He just looks so tired, she thought. A little pained smile crossed her face. She wanted so much to touch his cheek and stroke his hair, to wake him up so she could talk to him and introduce him to his little niece, Temper. They had been so close as children, and it was wonderful to see him again despite the circumstances. Talon lay on his side near the windows. Old Wren sat behind him, showing the girl how to stitch up the gunshot wound in Tay's back. The second floor of the old rebel building was quiet. The children were playing downstairs, others were out collecting food from the various gardens they tended, and Krenna's cot had been moved closer to the heating vent across the room to ease her breathing while she slept. It was oddly comforting to be back in rebel company. Asha? She turned, and behind her at the top of the stairs stood Hella, who fiddled with something in her hands. Tell Hook I'll do it, she swallowed. I'll hand over the leadership of the rebels to him. Okay, Asha nodded. The first thing he wants is for me to bring Jernovi's notebook to him. Hilla's face dropped into an expression of horror, as if she'd asked for one of the moons or even one of the children. Asha smiled and put a hand on Hilla's arm. I promise he'll keep it safe, and I'll see if we can return it as soon as possible. Can I ask what changed your mind? This. Hilla handed her a sealed envelope that was faded and yellow with age. On the front, written in an older style handwriting, was one word. Hawk. Asha gaped at it. How old is this? Where did it come from? Krenna told me it was written 50 years ago by Wren's mother, Isa, before her and her husband left the rebels. Asha was pierced for a moment by a deep shaft of terror. 50 years ago? But that's a good 30 years before he was even born. She swallowed. How could she know? Hilla shrugged. She was a time speaker, a channeler of the great fates, what the agency calls a time-side prophet. Amusement lifted into Hilla's bright blue eyes. I'm not exactly going to argue against the forces of time itself. Asha kept herself still so she didn't tremble or otherwise embarrass herself in the sudden confused dread. Hawk was a brilliant and sometimes frightening man, but he was just a man. He's just a man, he's just a man. She repeated the mantra to herself in an effort to calm the rising tide of panic. A shiver ran down her spine. It was so strong that her thoughts and fears dissipated like smoke. Something was wrong now. But she wasn't sure what. Ren and the girl looked up to where Krenna Ree lay sleeping, and Asha realised what was happening. The four of them ran across the room to the cot. Hilla got to her first and immediately cried out, "No, Krenna!" When Zay got there, Ren lifted their hands to Krenna's neck and diaphragm. Their voice was pained and sad. "There's nothing more I can do for her. She's gone." Hilla dropped to her knees and started to wail. The other rebels in the building seemed to sense what had happened, or heard Hilla's wailing, because one by one they came upstairs and gathered around Krenna's body. Krenna's young boys approached their mother's side from the back stairwell and were immediately embraced by Hilla and the other rebels as they grieved together. Standing a little back from the group and watching their grief, Asha remembered Krenna from her childhood. She'd been snarky and grumpy, but an incredibly loving and loyal woman. Asha swallowed. With all the empathic pain around her that she couldn't quite block, Asha started to cry. The grief bubbled out of her, not only for the loss of a childhood figure, but for the other losses in her life of her parents, the separation from her brother, friends who hadn't survived the desert training base she'd been sent to, and recently her dear husband Tesh. The rebels wept and wailed for a long time. Unable to help ease their suffering once her own tears had dried up, Asha led the girl and the two newest escapees to the kitchen. The four women did their best to cook what food they could find for everyone else, and together they created a sparse meal of fried vegetables and homemade flatbread. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filled empty tummies. They dished up the meal onto plates and made sure everyone in the room ate, even through their tears. After eating her own and helping to clear and wash the used plates, it was time to feed Temper again. She sat in a corner as the baby fed. "Asha." Hawk's voice was quiet, perhaps even gentle, and she wondered if he knew that Krenna had died. "Are you ready to come back yet?" "I was hoping to stay long enough to be here when Talon woke up." "I'm sorry, Asha. We need to leave Aram tonight." Her face tightened into a conflicted frown. "Why?" "The first escape in Marakan is tomorrow morning. To get there in time to help, we have to leave just after midnight." "When do we come back?" "Once we have a cell in every major city, we'll return to set up a master cell here." He paused as he changed the subject. "So what else needs to be done there before you can leave?" She sighed. "Not much. I've got his book. I just have to hand over your instructions, but you'll never believe what changed her mind." "The envelope." "How did you know?" she asked, mildly annoyed. "I saw a vision of you opening it. Have you yet?" She shook her head slightly. "No, it's addressed to you, and quite frankly it freaks me out." It was a mental laugh. "If you understood time a little better, it wouldn't worry you so much. Time doesn't flow in straight lines. It swirls and branches out in a huge network. I can only see what is already on my path, so sometimes messages have to come from other high-rating timesci to bring new threats onto my path for changing. The source of the envelope was timesci, correct?" "Yes, a timesci prophet." She sighed, feeling a little resentful of his condescending tone, and pitched her mental voice with a touch of mocking sarcasm. "So what now, oh great one?" She felt the empathic equivalent of an amused snort. "Well, now you get to open it for me, so we can see if it needs our attention immediately." Balancing the baby with one hand, she shuffled in a pants pocket for the envelope. She was trying to figure out how to open it with one hand when Ren approached, sat down next to her against the wall. Tears stained their wrinkled face, but their expression was kind. "I heard you were given my mother's envelope." "Yes," she smiled. "Could you help me open it?" Zay took it from her hands, ripped open the envelope, and unfolded it for them both to read. "Dear Hawk, I have dreams of your hook mask and what paths you will weave with the threads of time. Everything else you need will come to you as you expect it. From me, I have only one instruction: protect and trust my granddaughter, because without her help and wisdom you will fail. Isa Zuruyen. Asha stared at the note, feeling mildly dumbstruck. But, Ren, you never had any children. How could there be a granddaughter? The old androgen smiled. She wasn't talking about any child of mine. I suspect she was referring to my sister Anita's child. Lifting one arm, Zay pointed across the candlelit room to the girl who stood watching over Talon as he slept. Her? Yes, her name is Nalana Yin. Asha sensed a flare of very strong joy from them. I have a niece, and she's here with the rebels where she belongs. It's good to have more family around. She stared across the room at her brother. Yes, it is good. Asha. Hawk's voice was almost a whisper in her mind. I don't see any immediate danger to this girl. She should be safe with the rebels for now. We can investigate it later. For now, I need you to get here as soon as you can. She sighed and nodded slightly. Of course, I'll see you soon. Asha shuffled her free hand around the baby and into her front pocket. Pulling out pages of notes, she handed them to Ren. All of Hawk's instructions are in there. Included are some instructions on how to avoid a couple of potential attacks, as well as the location and timing of some escapes. Could you give it to Hilla once? She swallowed and glanced sadly across the level at Hilla's grieving form in the candlelight. Once it's the appropriate time. I think the first event is in a couple of weeks, so there's no huge rush. They took the collection of pages from her with a nod. Tears rose into Asha's eyes and her voice broke slightly. I have to go. Could you tell my brother that I'm sorry I couldn't stay? I really wanted to be here when he woke up, but Hawk needs me tonight. Ren nodded. Of course I can, Asha. They leaned over to give her a broad, comforting hug. Wrapping her free arm around him, she rested her head on his shoulder and sighed. I promise I'll be back as soon as I can.